In an earlier story on the anti-tax protests, we showed video footage of Kibwezi West Member of Parliament Mwengi Mutuse in an altercation, which we have since learned was not about the anti-tax protests. We wish to correct the impression that he was chased from a funeral, as he was not. The altercation was about a local matter. If you're just joining us, in an earlier story on the anti-tax protests, we showed video footage of Kibwezi West Member of Parliament Mwengi Mutuse in an altercation, which we have since learned was not about the anti-tax protests. We wish to correct the impression that he was chased from a funeral, as he was not. The altercation was about a local matter. Speaking of the anti-tax protests, the Kenya Defence Forces have been brought in to support the police to quote-unquote restore normalcy. And with me in the studio, as I mentioned just before the break, we've been joined by retired Colonel, or is it Colonel retired, Julius Minyuri, who is a non-resident research fellow, GLOSEPS. And we also have in the studio Dr. Ocheng Kamudhai, who is a security and conflict specialist. In fact, he tells me they both tell me this is teacher and student. At a certain point, the relationship was teacher and student. But I'll start with you, retired Colonel. In what situations are KDF deployed internally?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Olive. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me for this discussion. And first of all, I would like to start by standing with those who lost their lives, saying my condolences to them, and for those who are injured, I commensurate them and wish them quick recovery. Coming to your question, in what circumstances does can the KDF be deployed? It is very clear in the Constitution of Kenya, Article 241, 3D, and in Expression 3D, where we are now, the Constitution of Kenya, Article 241, clearly stipulates how KDF can be deployed. But here we should be looking more at how it has been deployed now, and that is Article 241, 3D. This is where KDF has been declared to assist in emergencies. I want to start by correcting the myth. A myth has been created that Kenya is under a state of emergency. I would like to start by debunking that myth and say that Kenya is not under any state of emergency, because what we are seeing is an assistance to the other agencies, which is clearly under Article 241 3D. Then there are sections of the KDF Act also that support this deployment. And once the Parliament has gone ahead and cleared that, it is a legal operation. What I would like to say is that the Gazette notice that was issued has clearly showed where the CS is obtaining its authority from. Mm-hmm. So it is not something that is out of the ordinary. It's not something that it's not a usurpation of a democratic space, as many may want to allude to. The fact is the law has been followed, and we are where we are. So the KDF deployment has been properly done, and it's within the law. Okay. So
you talk about it's not an usurpation of the democratic processes, yes, as I understood it. But, I mean, did you see them on Thursday? The tankers that were in, I know that it's called a tanker technically, and there was the guy who had the gun, and they were driving around. There is a psychological impact, whether you wish to admit it or not, because while the Gazette notice talks about them being deployed to safeguard critical infrastructure, it did send a message, did it not, Dr.
Thank you very much. My condolences also to the families and those who are still nursing injuries. To begin with, I would like to say that the use of force in trying to solve any problem is not useful, and it cannot solve a problem in the long term. So deployment of KDF or police or any other is not a solution to the current problem. And the problem that is arising here is in trying to frame this crisis. So the framers of this crisis are the ones that could be exaggerating either the situation or creating or having a different objective from what should actually be done. Whereas the law clearly says that KDF can be deployed to support the police, but have we reached that threshold? That's the question that we should be asking. And from my own analysis or from my own understanding, the police have not yet said they've been overwhelmed. And we've not seen where the police is overwhelmed. And this, therefore, is actually a big problem to me. Secondly, it is very clear that all armies are supposed to be apolitical. They're not supposed to be engaged in politics. So they're supposed to leave questions of civics and so on to the politicians and the civic authorities that exist. So bringing in the army to this kind of engagement is actually either trying to sell to us fear, and there's a danger in trying to sell fear, because if the fear is not bought, then what other option do you remain with? So these are some of the critical questions that we really need to ask ourselves. And then thirdly, the kind of equipment that KDF does not have equipment to engage civilians. It has equipments for combat, for war. So who are they fighting? And they cannot fight their own people. They are not meant to fight us. They are meant to fight enemies outside our country, to safeguard our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. So if that is not endangered, then there's a disconnect here. And I think psychologically, there is somebody who is trying to sell to us fear. And if we talk about critical infrastructure, see, there is a police unit that deals with that.
Actually, I did have that question. I mean, don't we, isn't it police who safeguard this critical infrastructure?
There is a special police unit that is supposed to safeguard that critical infrastructure. If that police unit can't do its job, then they would rather go back for retraining. But as far as I'm concerned, even my friend here knows, his training was not to deal with us. His training was, in fact, that is why they don't carry handcuffs. They're not supposed to handcuff people and arrest them.
You actually lead me up to my next question.
What are they doing now with the police?
You actually lead me up to the next. You lead me up to the next question. I was reading the KDF Act, and it provided some regulation where the deployment of KDF to support police is concerned. So there's the requirement that there's a respect for the Bill of Rights, and also should somebody be detained, they should be handed over to the national police. Are the military trained on how to engage civilians?
Thank you once again. I want to correct, to say a few things before I come to where you are. First of all, the government of Kenya operates or possesses the instruments of power. And the instruments of power is the political, the informational, the military, and the economic. The government is supposed to bring these ones together so they gel together to run the country. And when it comes now to a situation whereby there's a security problem, the government obviously will need to do something about it, because it's the business of the government to protect its people. And therefore, when the military is being deployed or any other security arm is being deployed, the government operates on what we call the informational space. The informational space is the information that the government is getting from the various agencies that provide information and intelligence to the government. Once this is done, then decisions are made. So structures are there in place to make decisions. And these decisions, we may not be private to them. We may not, because they operate at a certain level. And therefore, decisions are made at a certain level that we may not be private to. So when we start questioning or start alluding to exactly the rationale behind the deployment of the KDF, we may be biting too much, or maybe getting ourselves into an area that we're not very much aware of. Coming to your question of whether KDF has the powers of enforcing law and order, when the KDF has been deployed, and it's in the Act, when the KDF has been deployed in the role of assisting the other security agencies, they are given equivalent powers with those of the police service. They have the ability to arrest and detain. The only power that has been taken away from them is that of investigations. They will not investigate the offense, but any offending act will be, the person can be arrested and will be handed over to the police for purpose of investigation. And the officer, the military officer carrying out that particular duty, will now, for that particular time, have the same powers that of a police officer. So it cannot be prosecuted for doing a job that's not his. I would like to speak something about the psychological impact of having, you say those guys...
Them driving around.
With big guns and big armored personnel, because those are not tanks, those are armored personnel carriers. Moving around in armored personnel carriers with guns. Okay, so those are armored personnel carriers. Yes. Got it. Yeah, with guns. There's a psychological impact, of course. And it could be both positive or negative. It could be positive in the sense that sometimes if you look back at what was happening previously, or that friction between the KDF and the police, we have that back of a background where there was a bit of a scuffle between the two services. Some civilian personnel may not be very much into liking the police. But when they see the military, they feel they're more defended, they're more protected. That is a positive aspect. But again, when you look at intimidating weapons in the streets, they have also a negative effect. There's the effect that, are we really being exterminated by these people? Can we trust these people? There was the question that Dr. asked, who is the enemy in this case? That's why I'm coming to that. Because there's no defined enemy, I would like to say that in my other life, I'm a trainer. And I work for an organization called Center for Civilian Conflict, where we train militaries of the region to deal with civilians. And let me say categorically here that the Center for Civilian Conflict has cooperated. The Kenya Army Commander, the Commander Kenya Army, Commander Kenya Air Force, and the Commander Kenya Navy have given direct access to this organization to train the people, the soldiers, on dealing with civilians. We call it protection of civilian and civilian harm mitigation courses. We carry out these courses deeply within the KDF. We have done it with the Somali National Army. We're doing it across the region, so that the militaries of the region are no longer enemy focused, without knowing that the effects or the actions have an impact on the population. So KDF itself has over 1,000 trained soldiers. And I want to believe that in every unit where we have our agents of peace, of protection of civilians, we are able to pick out a few of these who have been advancing that part of it. Now, the other thing is... Before we move on to another point, one of the questions I have is that by giving... So you talked about equivalency of powers, and that is through the KDF Act, police, KDF, and I'll ask you to get into... So who are they answerable to in terms of the command structure? But before that, this is a civilian administration. By bringing in the military to take on this role, is the government taking a risk?
A very big risk. In fact, wherever you involve the military in political issues, which means civic issues, you're already making them test what goes on the other side. And that's why now coups and other things become part of it. We have seen, unless we are bereft of history, we have seen how these things have happened in different countries. It begins by, in fact, the military coming to the streets. If you look at the Egyptian revolution that occurred, which was in the Arab Spring, it began with the military coming out to help. Then later on, the military changed and was now supporting the civilians. So I think this is a risk that we are taking unnecessarily. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the military, before it engages, there are normally rules of engagement. We don't know these rules of engagement, how they are going to engage us. They've not been, and these are supposed to be everywhere. Even the military themselves are supposed to carry them in the pocket so that they remember how to engage us, because we are not combatants. And the rules are very clearly that we must be protected from combat prepared groups, because we are not combatants. secondly, even if my friend says they train military on how to handle civilians, they train them how to handle civilians in combat situations, not during law and order issues. And this is a law and order thing. And that is very important, that we need to be very, very clear. And if we go now to the command and structure, this is also problematic. The ranks of the military and the ranks of the police and their SOPs are different. So how is this command and structure taking place? So these are the questions that we need to ask. So when you now get a colonel and a police inspector or commander, who now gives the command? And these are issues that they also know that in operations normally challenge them. And that is why you even find in peacekeeping, when they found out peacekeeping was originally a military affair. But when they found out that the military has no capacity to deal with the civilians, they introduced police. In peacekeeping, actual war zones, and they realized the military could not deal with us. So they introduced now the civil groups, civilians, medics, and so on, as well as the police. So I don't know how this marriage is happening, but we hope the wedding will be okay. We'll ask some higher priests to bless them in this wedding.
What do you make of this wedding, this marriage? How does it work?
Actually, let me say that I am agreeing with my teacher here on the risk aspect. The risk aspect, I agree. The one thing that we have to note is that the Gen Zs that have been at the forefront of this protest have actually what you would call a saturation point. They are no longer amiable to rhetoric. Therefore, they have a reason. They have a reason to demand more. And seeing what they have been doing, I mean, you can argue that hand power may not be the solution. And therefore, I would want to agree that to an extent, the deployment could have been premature. But again, I want to put a rider that there's nothing that is done without a proper assessment of things. We have the National Security Council, which must have sat and decided that now time has come for us to escalate this to the next level because of what was happening at that time. So if that exactly actually happened then, everything was in order. But to actually go back to the military's ability to operate in the civil space, which is, I find that most people think that the military cannot operate in the civil space. Actually, on the contrary, the military can operate very well in the civil space. The training of the KDF is very elaborate. It is not a training that just is focused on war alone. It's focused on war, but also focused on ground control and managing protests and managing disasters. Because at one time, you find that you may be in a space. Let me take an example of countries that do not have sufficient police power. If you find yourself there and there's a problem and you have to do a cordon and search, for instance. A cordon and search involves processes whereby a certain area is isolated because of what is happening in that area, and you need to pacify it. Therefore, the military is trained in such operations to save civilians. We are not the business of killing people. The military is not the business of killing people. The military is the business of saving lives. Most people may not have understood that, but the military is the business of saving lives. How do we then make sure that they understand how to save lives? If I may give examples in the training that Dr. here is trying to dilute, we train our soldiers to work with the civil society groups. We call it community-based protection. In the areas outside Nairobi or in other areas, you see these guys in this combat dress, going to villages, and I know the professor knows about civil-military cooperation. He knows about that very well. But now we have even escalated it more to working in community-based protection groups, where the military now works together with the communities not to solve exactly the community problem alone, but to solve what problem the military may be bringing to the communities. So if we are talking and we are looking at bringing the military to assist the police here, and there was something that was said previously that the police didn't ask for it. You cannot say the police not ask for it because the National Security Council, the IG of police is there. So we do not know what transpired there. It's possible that he actually asked for that help. And since we are consumers, we are not privy to that what was taking place in there. So please, it's possible that it was asked. Then another thing is that was come up that you have no enemy, there are no combatants. True. The Kenyan civilian population is not the military or the police enemy. They are not. It is only that when you go to a certain length of a level of criminality creeps in, destruction of life is first and foremost must be protected. Then property must be protected. So when the population or the protests begin to turn into criminal activity, then they must be responded to in order to stop the possible loss of life or destruction of property. So there's no enemy. Nobody should be considered as an enemy. It is a law and order thing. So when you're doing law and order, you are dealing with criminality.
All right. And before, okay, so criminality, the Rongai situation, and sorry, it brought to mind Westgate, this where we had the military come in and police, and eventually it is the special units of police which resolve the situation, or so it appeared. So this police-military cooperation situation has left a bitter taste in our mouths before. But looking at the Rongai situation, police were overwhelmed initially. We're told about a police officer who had his gun taken away from him. And then now the response was also criticized as being too heavy-handed. In a situation where you see, like Parliament, the police were there, and still these people managed to breach the gate, what do I call it, the wall, around Parliament. Does that not warrant the military involvement in your view?
Okay, for me to respond to that, I want to take you back to the US around January 6th or something. There was some breach of Congress,
yes,
isn't
that
it?
Is true.
By the civilians. Why didn't they call the US Army? The US Army never responded to that. They didn't call it. In fact, they even said they never called the National Guard, which would have responded like the Army. So if this didn't happen in the US, which I think was a bigger crisis than what we had here, then what are we trying to say? And to explain why the army now must operate or learn how to, it's about winning hearts and minds. Because even in war, you can't win if you really don't have the civilian population behind you. It will be difficult. That's why they are now learning to support the civilians. But they have not learned how to handle us, because that is not in their training. I think they should tell us, or you should take one day and visit what they train. They train in killing. They don't train in smoothing people up and so on. So, and if we look at now the lives that were lost, these lives that were lost have largely been attributed to the police. It has not been attributed to civilians killing civilians. It is the police who, in fact, it's bullet wounds. And those bullet wounds can be seen. What has been there is here skelter, here and there criminality, which could have been taken care of. And if you now decry the situation of Parliament and Rongai, the question that we need to ask, what was the kind of deployment that was there? In Rongai, I think the numbers of the police was a few. They could have called for reinforcement from somewhere else in order for them to have good numbers in order to respond to the large numbers that were there. All in all, myself, I want to say, if in the US they didn't call the army for a breach of Congress, I do not see why we have to call our army now. They should go back to the barracks and enjoy themselves and wait for real war. Yes.
Aside from the breaching of perimeter walls, Colonel, Kenya has deployed officers to Haiti to go quell the situation there, the insecurity there. And here we have KDF deployed to assist the police. Is it not ironic?
Well, it may It may look and sound ironic, but first and foremost, we need to ask ourselves, when did the Haiti mission promise start? We didn't have the current issues, right? That's to start with. But for first and foremost, I want to really call upon everyone to understand that we're in a very, very, very tricky situation. The current situation that is happening in Kenya is unfortunate, especially the agitation by our children to a better life. Now, Kenya cannot abdicate its international responsibilities. We had already promised to deploy in Haiti. Kenya is also a signatory of many international statutes, of obligations that
But the question for me is
let me finish.
If the police cannot handle the situation in Kenya, how are they going to manage the situation in Haiti?
Let me finish. I'm coming there. We have an international obligation that we are going to fulfill. And therefore, when as a nation, when we deploy the police, that should not be seen that the police is abandoning their responsibilities here to go and quell another problem there. We have fulfilled our international obligation. But now let me come to your question of how can then the police, which is failing here, be succeeding there? I would like first and foremost start by saying, here in Kenya, we do not want to start by deploying elite forces. To start every time there's a small problem, we deploy the elite forces. We need to understand how to escalate. From when the problem is small, you deal with it small. When it begins to become big, we deal with it big. Before we become the elite forces, even the military has elite forces, and the elite forces were not deployed. But even the police did not deploy the elite forces. What you're seeing in Haiti, those are elite forces of the police service. They have undergone serious training to be able to deal with the situation there. The Haiti problem is actually a law and order problem. Therefore, it cannot be a military problem for us. You may want to ask why the military here and why the police there. That's a law and order problem. But here the military is being deployed to assist. It is not the military which is doing the law and order business. They are assisting. So when it comes to that, first of all, we are fulfilling our international obligations, and the problem in Haiti is different from the problem in Kenya. The problem in Kenya has required an assistance from the military, which through the legal processes, it has been given. We cannot deploy the military abroad. We cannot deploy the Kenyan Defense Forces abroad without being requested through the United Nations system because we're a member of the international community. And therefore, if it is a peacekeeping operation, like Dr. Kamdai here said, then the processes are also there to ensure that it is now a peacekeeping operation, either under Chapter 6 or under Chapter 7. So, unless those are followed, you cannot deploy the military. Now, the request for Haiti was for police. And therefore, Kenya decided that it has the capacity to provide police for Haiti. And that's what you have done. And by the way, have you seen that they've already arrived? I did. They're already in the streets of Port-au-Prince.
I did see that. I saw you nodding, Dr. Kamudhai. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with his position on the issue?
You see, the problem of Haiti is what would have needed KDF deployment. Because those are real gangsters. From what I have seen, at least, I can't say those are the young men here, the GNZs, who are facing our police here. Those are real hardened criminals, some of them ex-police and so on. So I also got a bit confused why it was the police and not the KDF that was deployed, because it should have been the KDF from my own perspective, because they are the ones who have the training, capacity, capability, and even the weaponry. Yes. And now if those are not taken into account, then there's a problem of capacity and capability that may arise. Because from what I've seen and what I've heard and the responses, it's like they are saying, come on, baby. There was some reply. People are saying, come on, baby, here. You know, those are people enjoying you. Mm. So if we were very serious, then we should have escalated. If the request was for police, we could have also analyzed the situation correctly and said from where we sit, I think the appropriate deployment should be military and not, or some very advanced force, but not these ordinary brothers of ours here who engage us and break our legs or shoot us. Because that will be a shooting match there. It will not be. So that's where I think. But anyway, from my perspective in all this, I think the agitations of the GNZs, what are they called? GNZs.
Gen Z.
No, I'm an old man. This denotes us. Requires a political solution.
Actually, you're preempting my final question because I want you to make your final remarks.
Yes.
Having discussed all of this, where does that leave us?
It says, from my own angle, that what we require is a political solution. And the president said he has called representatives of different groups. These are the people who should sit down and solve the problem, because use of force, intimidation will not solve the problem. That will only temporarily quell the situation. But one day it may arise from even a bigger angle. So it's important that we deal with it now through the proper means, and the proper means is a negotiated solution.
So are you saying this decision to deploy the KDF should be reversed as soon as possible?
As far as I'm concerned, it should have been reversed yesterday. Because supposing those GNZs get used to intimidation, or they win over the army, then what options do we have? Yes.
All right, your final thoughts?
Thank you very much, Olive. And my final thoughts are not very far from Dr. Hamudai. First and foremost, I would like to say that the deployment of the KDF is not illegal. There is no state of emergency in this country, but the designation of security emergency falls within the law. However, having said that, I would also like to caution that we should really avoid escalating molehills into mountains. The Gen Zs have shown us a new thing that we did not know. They have no leader, they have no fear, and therefore, if, for instance, like Dr. Hamudai says, if, for instance, because once again, it is not possible that we shoot everybody. If, for instance, they are not intimidated, and I talked about escalating situations, if they are not in any way intimidated, then what? I would like to caution Kenyans in general, because there's been a lot going on around the social media, or I don't know what. I have been around the world. I've worked in a lot of places. I've worked in Somalia, South Sudan, DRC, Ethiopia, Rwanda. I've worked in all these countries, and I've seen what happens. We have a country. We have a country. And in as much as we may not be happy with it, I would like to look at the glass as being half full than half empty. So I would like to call upon all the Kenyan people to really rethink and think hard about where they want this country to be in the next few years. Do we want a situation where we do not have a country? Or do we want a country maybe limping, not exactly the beacon of everything, but we have a functional country? So in all that we are doing, let us not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Those are my final remarks.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for providing your expertise and insights on this subject matter. And with me in studio having this discussion, I've had Colonel Retired Julius Minyuri, who is a non-resident research fellow, GLOSEPS, which is the Global Center for Policy and Strategy. We've also had Mwalimu in studio, Dr. Ochieng Kamudhai, who is a security and conflict specialist. And gentlemen, as we move away from this subject matter, 9 people died died in an accident this evening in Ratili area along the Narok-Bomet highway. The driver of a public service vehicle, which was headed in the direction of Bomet, lost control of the vehicle after a tire burst, with the vehicle rolling several times. 6 men, 2 women and a child died instantly, with 2 adults who were seriously injured rushed to Longisa County Referral Hospital. The bodies were rushed to Longisa mortuary. On the anti-tax protests, media and how it was used in the anti-finance bill protests. Safina Chenguma takes a look at the social revolution which utilized the online platform to mobilize, warn, create awareness and push for the rejection of the finance bill.
The anti-finance bill protests will stand as unique in the history of demonstrations in Kenya. Dubbed the Gen Z protests, thousands of young people who were frontliners in the series of demonstrations displayed their digital prowess and social consciousness, recording using their phones, and some even live streaming at the center of the action. Such as this young female protester and her peers who were on TikTok. At the scene of an active shooting on the lawns of Parliament buildings as the anti-riot police officers tried to deter the invasion.
Some of them will go to the extent of actually risking their lives to project what is happening live, and they get monetary value. But we are not saying monetary value was the main driver.
William Decker is a digital and economic researcher. He says that apart from the economic prospects of social media in this era of content creation, the anti-finance bill protests also depicted the power of digital activism in mobilizing local and global support for a cause.
A hashtag such as Reject the Finance Bill, that hashtag had over 2.5 million tweets that have been tweeted around the world, not just in Kenya. Other users who are in other places around the globe were surprised. They were saying, Reject the Finance Bill. Which finance bill is this? Then they come and find it's Kenya.
An AI digital monitoring done by gov't Digital in 2 weeks of the protests showed that Kenya was ranked among the top 10 countries globally due to the volume of conversation on the finance bill, with more than 31 million interactions generating 713 million impressions across the public web. Close to 40% of the conversation was negative.
That information sharing had one specific tone. That tone was a tone around anger and somebody not being contented with specific clauses in the bill. So then it means somebody spreads from anger from my end, it goes to someone else. It's an attitude that then is built up by lots of people. In the traditional concept of communication, from awareness you go to attitude, and then from attitude somebody can take action. Then it got people to take action on the street, and so people will feel that they really need to express this anger, or they really need to express this frustration, or they really need to express this commitment towards changing something.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm here to address you. You must go. Kwapa, not Wendy.
Social media was exploding with countless videos of daring acts by protesters depicting their fearlessness and bravery in bypassing the anti-riot police in the determination to accomplish their mission. This too had an impact.
Another thing social media has done, and I think this will be studied for long, is emboldening young people, giving people some sort of a bit of mental strength. You feel like I can do this. And this is what we saw playing out on the actual days of the demonstrations. You see your colleagues on the street, and then you feel left out, what traditionally they called FOMO, fear of missing out.
Social media has been pivotal in deviating from the conventional strategies of mobilization in the protests.
There are those who are on the ground, who are boots on the ground, but then there are those who are actually online. But remember, those who are online were doing a lot of things. They will share posters, they will share clips, they will tell you where people are. And then people were actually tweeting live. They're saying, oh, they actually entered this particular point. They're at Holy Family Basilica, let's go there.
Artificial intelligence was used to help educate wider audiences on the bill through the ChatGPT models designed to answer questions, and platforms like TikTok and X which are being used to share videos of people explaining the finance bill in various Kenyan dialects. The impact of this level of sophistication in information sharing, DECA says, was hard to imagine. Channels of communication morphed from countless WhatsApp groups to X spaces where participants fearlessly castigated the government and the police for arbitrary arrests of some of the most vocal online activists.
I don't know where is Billy. Where is Billy? I don't know. Unfortunately.
Still, they resorted back to social media to protect themselves and their peers. Of significance is also how digital platforms have been used to mobilize funds amounting to billions within a short time, part of which has been used to assist victims of the protests who have been admitted in various hospitals. On the dark side, however, many unverified videos were also shared, with misinformation spreading like bushfire, a miss that may have caused more harm than good during the protests. But despite the downside, DECA points to the fact that the digital activism provides a powerful platform for diverse voices to be heard and can be used to catalyze change. Safin Acheng Oma, Citizen